All right, best for last. We're also gonna recognize this last day, Friday afternoon. So, want this to be fun, upbeat. We're excited to share some things with you all, but we know there's a lot of smart people in this audience too. So we want this to be engaging. If you have like something to contribute, raise your hand. We'd love to hear other ideas or stories that we talk about throughout this, tactics that have worked for you. We're not here to just talk at you. So want this to be engaging. I'm James Williams, and we're talking about engagement strategies today. I originally signed up for this thinking we were talking about how to find your spouse, and found out later that that was not the case. But I lead the customer success team at a company called Torch. It is a B2B SaaS company focused on professional development, primarily through one-to-one coachings of leaders at incredible organizations throughout the world. And y'all, I have a really, really incredible panel with me. Becky and I go way far back, but I will let her introduce herself.
Hello, Becky Banasic. When I started this panel, I was working at TimelyMD. I am not. So I'm not the ex-SVP, but I am ex-TimelyMD. So I got to work with some of the other people. So yeah, we met at a conference quite a while back, but there's several other presenters here that we all started back at Bizarre Voice together, creating the client success title here in Austin. But most recently, so all of us had started in very, very specific B2B client success where all of this started. But my last 2 or 3 companies have been much more B2B2C. And so I'm excited to talk about engagement models because I've had to think of this from a radically different perspective. When you have consumers or other people and your clients, the ones who are paying, are not the ones who you're actually engaging with or using your software. So very excited to get to talk about that.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Matt Primero. I was the customer success director for MuleSoft, but was recently part of the reduction. But still happy to be here regardless, because I got to meet a number of wonderful people over the course of the last couple of days. But my role, if anybody has worked with or not worked with MuleSoft before, we were in the integration platform as a service. Primarily my customers were strategic enterprise and most recently public sector, so mainly state and local government customers, which I don't know if anybody has any experience with that, but their systems are legacy. And to get them to feel like they have some type of engagement and to get them actively engaged is a struggle. But we've worked our kinks. I have found myself to be quite successful in that space over the last couple of years. So excited to share some of the best practices as part of today's session.
Plus, you can't usually take them to lunch.
I know.
Public sector. So.
No swag. Like, you can't do anything.
All right, we're going to start with, we're doing a quick icebreaker, which I said, what is one thing you always will splurge on? Like, no matter what's a guilty pleasure splurge? And I will go first. I sort of said, so I'm one of 4 children, and everybody got braces except for me, which pisses me off. And I tell my parents constantly they owe me like $5,000 or $6,000. But so I'm very into like teeth whitening stuff and dental. So that's typically what I said. I asked my team this question earlier this year. But I told them like 2 weeks ago I went to brunch, which ended in me buying Taylor Swift tickets in Phoenix. And that was a splurge, let me tell you. But Becky, what's on your list?
Food. I will splurge on all food. So not this birthday, but the birthday before for my husband. We picked Pujol in Mexico City, but we started with a dinner reservation and then worked our way backwards. So dinner first, then I got the flight, and then I got a hotel. And I will absolutely continue to do that and completely believe in doing that. So.
Mine's pretty straightforward. I just like to splurge myself with tattoos. I don't know if that's the best way to spend my money all the time, but and then fun fact, actually,
it's great.
I just found out that my tattoo artist is her best friend.
Yeah, so his tattoo artist in Chicago went to my wedding, he got his passport to come to my wedding 25 years ago in Italy. And so I texted Ben and a picture of us, and he's like, yep, this is a small world. So.
How crazy is that? Literally, they just found that out.
Just found this out at lunch.
Like, yeah, I got a tattoo in Chicago. She's like, oh my God, he went to my wedding 25 years ago. Anybody in the audience, what do you splurge on?
Travel wine. Mm-hmm. Both very good.
I want to hang out with whoever, both of you.
Yeah. Cool.
Board games?
Okay. Love that. Tattoo. We all have tattoos. We talked about that.
Yeah.
Are you gonna get the CSC, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I'm going to get the customer success logo after this.
Yeah.
Free sponsorship.
Yes.
So we want to talk about the fact that kind of everybody comes from different backgrounds here a little bit. My whole career has been B2B, SaaS, fast growth, sub 500 person companies. But we want to do kind of like a poll. First of all, do you work in SaaS technology sector? Okay. How many B2B people? B2C people?
Oh man, now y'all are going to be really bored with my
I don't
part.
know. Any B2B to C?
There you go. Excellent. Okay.
All right. We wanted to like figure out who our people were because we're going to talk through kind of like a couple different use cases for this. But to kind of get started, we want to talk about what customer engagement means. I made a joke earlier about it, but we were kind of signing up for this panel in our first session, connecting. I wanted to be like, are we all like aligned on actually what we're talking about and what a customer engagement model is? So we're going to talk a little bit about like what is y'all's definition when you think about approaching a customer engagement model?
Well, I'm going to say that I'm just excited when the first panel that Gainsight was already talking about engagement scoring, right? Because engagement to me is one of the hardest things or pieces to measure, and we want to include it in health scores. We want to do that. But hey, if all of us are doing customer success to be able to keep our clients and have them grow, there's an element of that which is how are you communicating with them? How often are you communicating with them? How is it different by different segments? And how is it different with different audiences? So I think of it that way. And there's a lot behind the scenes to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, I feel like in terms of my definition of customer, or at least how I approach customer engagement, I tend to thrive in uncomfortable situations, so I like to get a temperature of like where the customer is at. And as everybody knows, within customer success, you're not going to always have a happy customer. And so what I like doing is leveraging those customer success tools like Gainsight and Salesforce and understanding what they're struggling with so I can kind of cater to their engagement, whether it needs more enablement, it needs just more executive engagement. So I'm able to pull different levers within our organization to, tap in. Because I think customer success, we do our best to quarterback everything, but, at the end of the day, it's got to work as a team. So,
Yeah. Absolutely. So I'm actually, the reason I signed up for this panel is because it's very, very, very relevant to me. So I'm actually going to share a few minutes of the story of kind of how we got involved with customer tiering and engagement at Torch. Because like a common theme here, there was the conversation of more with less, right? And so we actually got a new COO that came to us and started about a month before I started. So it was about 8 or 9 months ago. And the first exercise she wanted to do, every single department leader, we had to do a customer lifecycle initiative. And we had daily stand-ups for 3 weeks with every leader, which doesn't that sound fun? But I want to kind of talk about like the purpose of that. So we rolled out this, let me go back one. We kind of went to really think about how we were going to map out our customer lifecycle. And through that, every cross-functional department came about and created their RACI, and it was amazing and beautiful. And I thought that was the end of it. And then this brilliant new leader came to me and said, like, okay, now you have to take that and based off of the current economy, you have to find a way to get at least 25% capacity back in your CSM team. This is like the ultimate more for less because we need to find a way we can take on more customers without the hiring model really increasing. And so that's kind of what I was tasked with is like, okay, how do we do that? And so the first thing that we had to focus on a lot was the tiering and segmentation model. And so, we looked at, this is a sample of what we put out. We looked at so much data, like the millions and millions and millions of spreadsheets. And this is probably like an elementary view across it. But creating like, how do you actually categorize our customers specifically? And the key things there were the high value touch points, right? So we didn't necessarily talk about the weekly checkups every single moment or exactly implementation, but like as a business, what does our commitment look like for them? But the most interesting thing here, which I think a lot of when I talk about engagement models is that then I had to like go on a road show for every different customer type and tier and work with our sales partners and say, okay, how did we come up with this? Do you guys agree with these tiers? Are you comfortable with this support model? Because at the end of the day, this is all we can commit to. And we were in this fine balance of we got to find a way to scale back our CSMs while like increasing and driving customer loyalty, which is what this is talking about. And that's really, really freaking hard. And so this was kind of my process that I worked on a lot throughout the second half of last year, and really starting to enroll, create next steps, and roll out an overall change management strategy for how we rolled out an engagement model internally. And this was something that was a massive project, especially when we had salespeople who were like, hey, we're not comfortable telling our customers they're getting one EBR a year, or that they can only meet quarterly or monthly, right? And what do those conversations look like? So that was a little bit of kind of like, I wanted to share how my process went and how the change management, we built sales collateral so we could set expectations up front. And then also existing customers, that was probably our largest uphill battle of saying like, hey, I know we used to meet weekly, but now we got to meet monthly, or now we got to meet quarterly. And so we'll share a little bit later kind of like how this actually manifested. But a lot of this we kind of talk about is that we had to begin with data. And I think when you're thinking about a tiering and segmentation model, we got to start with data. And so we want to talk a little bit about that concept. First of all, I want to ask people like, who has a CRM with data? Who trusts all the data in their CRM? Oh my God, literally no one. Who has product usage data in their CRM or in a CS tool? All right. So we have them.
How many people are jealous looking at those first few slides of how much data you had access to do this? Yeah.
I have some incredible VLOOKUP talent on my team that did a lot of marrying data together. But I want to ask my crew up here, what's the most important data? We're starting with an engagement model. You got to build it off of something to be able to measure it. What are we starting with?
I mean, again, I think you have to start with whatever CRM. I mean, you've got to start with that customer data first. And to me, if you've got usage data, so when I start to talk about some of my examples, I have clients at TimelyMD and at previous companies where the client is not using the software. It's an end user who's using the software. And I know that some of the rest of you are nodding along because you've lived this too. So if you're lucky enough that you've got product usage data, to me, that's always the second most important thing that you do. But I'm here to talk about some examples or ways to get around that when that's not what you get to lean on. But I think if you've got those two, I think most data shows that if you've got product usage, that is going to be the strongest contributor from a health scoring standpoint that's going to tell you whether or not somebody's going to renew. And then I think, a lot of the more catchphrase or whether it's a catchphrase or like hopefully finally the reality of getting to value realization. Value realization is where you start to see that you've got the data to be able to really upsell or cross-sell, whether that's your responsibility or someone else's responsibility. But really what that all comes down to then is saying your baseline data is like, I've got the right client data first. I know, and if we don't trust it, it's a different beast. You've got usage data to tell you if you're getting to retention, but it's a whole different beast when you start to talk about engagement or value drivers, to start to talk about like getting into upsell, cross-sell, and getting into loyalty.
Yeah, very similarly, I use product usage as one of the key telling signs, and then I'll try to marry that data with the customer health scorecard within like our CRM to see if, in fact, does the lack of usage mirror the fact that we're not as engaged with this customer? And that allows me to kind of prescribe the type of, again, engagement model that we need to leverage, whether it's, executive alignment, aligning the CSM to the technical stakeholder level, aligning with their outcomes or what their strategy is. It also tells me how far along within their roadmap are we? Do we look like we're running behind schedule, or if we're actually doing a good job, the data is just not accurate.
Yeah, and my background, one of my longest tenures at a company called Pendo, so talk about product usage data. We had lots of it, and my current company, we have very not lots of it. But I want to
tell a quick Pendo story, because first year at the first Pendo conference, so I was at a company called Trenkite. We were the first Pendo client. So I got to speak at the first conference. So you had all this usage data, and I had the person using it the most, even though I didn't win the award that year. And this is where product usage data can be a problem, is when you're using it in weird ways. So we had a screen up that we had created something that was like a SQL query that would update it every 5 minutes under Miles Powell's user to be able to say and put up our NPS scores and if we'd had any new surveys that came in. So Miles was the biggest user of Pendo, but it was fake because we had that going to be able to show it up on a screen.
Yep.
And so, yes, you can use your usage data, but you need to make sure it's the right usage to make sure that's the case. So that's my little side story.
No, that's great. I mean, I think that kind of leads in because, my world is B2B SaaS, so like product usage is typically a web interface, it's a SaaS product. But both of you all said you kind of have blinders in some of your previous organizations into what actual end users were doing and how you track their type of usage. Do you want to share a little bit more there?
Yeah, so I'm happy to start with this too. So Timely, what we were doing was virtual healthcare for college students. And so the people who bought were schools. So I may have a VP of Student Affairs. The VP of Student Affairs, our software is actually like, hey, it's a HIPAA compliant way to do just like you're doing all your doctor's visits over COVID. So the VP of Student Affairs is never using that. A student's using that, and they may use that once, and that would be incredibly successful. So when you start to talk about usage data, the engagement that becomes really important is the student engagement, which is once removed. And it's not very trackable, by some kind of like, we used Pendo, but we were using it to be able to tell students how to get in and get out. It really wasn't going to be relevant to us for retention or upsell. But what they cared about was that utilization piece. So how many students were getting registered and how many were getting utilized. So our engagement strategy, when we start to talk about that, was much more about how do we get students to do this and how do we arm the people who are paying for our services to actually use that to get people to register. Yep. So we'll talk more about that in a minute, but.
For us, it was, while we did get product utilization data, we weren't sure who the users were, so we had to proactively seek out who those users were by talking to IT managers and architects. But then that forced our hand into better understanding who those users were. Did they understand the tool? Did they need more training or enablement? So it forced us to give that extra level of engagement. And then also with that, what type of messaging is going back up to leadership and some of the key stakeholders that are essentially paying the bill. So, while aligning from the bottom up, we had to also make sure that we were just as engaged from the top down.
Does anybody else have like on-prem or like a user that you can't track and you're not sure how engagement works there? Any tips or tricks? You're like, no.
Waiting on you.
No, that's a struggle that I've always thought about for, you hear these use cases that are, they're people completely offline or field workers, we were talking about and stuff as well, where there's data there.
I guess sometimes, it's not it's not a strategy by any stretch of the imagination, but letting them churn and letting something happen internally for the people that you don't even, executives may not think, oh, we don't have people utilizing this platform. We can offer kind of extensions for them with new license keys, and if they've kind of delayed and not really been in touch with us, we just kind of let it fall. Yep. And then all of a sudden there is this internal fire drill for, oh shit, we really were using that platform, and we've got all these doctors, we were telehealth too, mad at us that, now.
Let them miss it.
Yeah, it kind of works sometimes. It's risky, but. Yeah.
Well, and, speaking about one of the things we were talking about when we were talking about tricks is okay, so in our case, providers are a constituent base for us, but they're the ones we're paying to be able to do this. Students are end users. So there's an engagement piece that is similar to probably what everybody else is doing of saying hey, we're sending emails, we're doing meetings, we're doing business reviews with them. But none of those types of engagements or activities were at all indicative of whether or not somebody's going to renew. So we were trying to come up with activities and pulling forward activities. Plus, we had a very seasonal business. So if we were going to have a point of contact churn or leave us, right? Not leave us but go to a different organization. All of that happens at the end of the school year. So if anybody's going to change, it's everybody's departing in May and then trying to get hired by the time they start in the fall. So we started doing tricks like, hey, one of the processes we would do is every year you could order swag and pick a particular item or two that would go to students. So we tried to pull forward and say, hey, do your swag order, in February, because that may be a better indication of saying, if somebody's hesitating to order something for the fall, then now you're trying to be oh, this is an indication for me that they're not willing to commit to doing something that they need to do. So how can you come up, if you can't use product usage, how can you come up with other little ways to show that somebody is committed to you in the long term? And that was one of the things. So we would do things like that, or, hey, let's start to talk about what's your schedule for your health fairs for next school year, so that we could start start to line those things up. And even then, if we lost that POC, then, hey, we've got some anchors in to whoever's replacing them about what that looks like. So to me, we were trying to find some of those types of tricks.
Awesome. So we want to talk we're at 3 parts here. So we wanted to talk about setting up the engagement model. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I'm rolling this out now. And then we want to talk about the driving customer loyalty, which I think is the metrics and how we're actually following that. So to talk a little bit more, so this is all like my second half of last year, right? Getting all of this ready, where we had CKO. First of all, does everyone know what CKO is? I said that and a couple people were like, I don't know what CKO is. But it's company kickoff. I thought that was a standard term. But this week we had company kickoff, which was virtual, which is kind of sad. But I talked about the engagement model and how we're doing more with less and the intentionality behind that. And so I talked to the company about all the groundwork that we had set, which we got pushed into Salesforce as an engagement tier, which was so exciting because that means the entire company can be aligned around that. But what we really did is, and I've always been hesitant to do this, but map out every single touch point within a customer journey that you're having. And I mean, I was a CSM for years, and you have the biweekly check-ins, right? Or the monthly check-ins, and if you're great, you do have an agenda. If you're not great, you get on and say, is there anything you want to talk about? And then you kind of hop off. And that's a lot of how a majority of CS teams work. But having to create this 25% capacity, I'm like, okay, we don't have the luxury for that. Every single conversation has to have a very specific point and reason. And so we created a complete blueprint for every single meeting that we were going to be having with customers. And the exciting thing was, this actually is kind of working, and it's touching on every of the big pain points that we faced before. And so the exciting things are conversations like setting expectations before they become a customer. And what does it look like when you're joining a pre-sales, your pre-sales team's very educated on what their engagement model is going to be. They know up front they're only getting one business review, or they're not getting any, they'll get a digital one. Those that get executive sponsors know it before they become a customer, and they know how many cadence. Are they meeting weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or quarterly? And these are conversations we're putting with our customers very much up front, so there's no shifts in expectations there. Are there customers you have to break the rules for sometimes? Yes. But so that, we're really excited about creating a success plan then from the beginning, passing this all the way through, and then really changing the conversation of a welcome call to be extremely prescriptive on here's the exact components that we want to do. And we're really leaning around this concept of the blueprint, which is building, what are we building? Hopefully promoters and GRR and NR. But these are the things where we're really, really hyper-focused on what are the best practices. And I think there's a big thing here that when I think about true customer success, I always tell my team, your talk about the product should be 10 to 15%, right? A lot of these conversations should be about how you do your job better. How do you enroll people at your company to believe in the software, to utilize it? How are they going to measure it? And that's where we're really leaning into success plans to make sure it's documented from day one. And then from there, it's funny, the Vitally crew yesterday, the QBRs are dead crew. I sort of just rolled that out where every month now we're doing kind of a small QBR with our customers that are in enterprise or strategic, where we're focusing on adoption and engagement metrics right then. We're talking about what we know are our most valuable features, and we're highlighting it with that and planning out what the next month's sprint is. And so we're really trying to say, hey, business reviews, they were taking us 25 hours to prep and getting this senior leader and that senior leader, and we're we can't scale that out anymore across these tiers. So how do we do the bite size of value throughout our customer base more often? And so the other thing we really tried to lean into, what are our pillars of success? What do we know has to be true for our customers to be successful? And then that's what we're going to support. That's what we're going to push. And like I said, a lot of these things are things that are not technology based, but are more about how can they be the most successful in their roles at the company. And I think even we've all worked with Gainsight now. I remember when I had a Gainsight CSM, and every conversation, it was not about button clicking. It was okay, so you guys are thinking about rolling out success plans. How important is that to your organization? Where are you going? And it was so much more of a conversation about the industry and how we can empower you internally than it was about the technology, which we are really trying to lean into.
And I was going to say, I have an example of that as well in terms of, we were able to support and add associates and have a more junior level to support our CSMs to try to get more efficient. And one of the key things that we did that seems really obvious, right, because we're all used to as individual contributors that we're going back and we're researching and we're knowing what the strategic plans are. But we went back and got for every every college campus, everybody posts what their strategic plan is. So what's most important to them. And nobody's out there without saying right now they care about mental health, right? Like every college right now cares about mental health. So we went back and got every school's strategic plan that's out there and published, and actually just took a screenshot, took a big red circle, and like led every conversation with saying this, like, remember VP of Student Affairs or CAPS director, this is one of your key strategic measures of your entire organization that we're, doing, and reminded them of that like every conversation. Yep. So when you talk about some of those key pillars or trying to tie this back of what you're doing as being truly something strategic to their organization, it doesn't hurt to keep reminding them of that, even if it's one slide. Like, I think that that's a really important way to not have the conversation go to the lowest common denominator, which I think is where check-ins tend to go. Where check-ins should go to die, not all the, yeah.
And I would also say too, as part of like your ex QBRs, like to have those on that slide, I feel like is helpful in asking the customer back, like, are these still valuable to you, right? Because now you're showing the effort of, we want to continue to stay aligned with you as a partner, not as a vendor.
For sure, and I think like most businesses are facing like the contract situation and some churns that are popping up, and so I think about like the concept of a champion and like what their engagement model looks like, and they're stressed and busy and things like that, and I'm like really focused on how can I make their lives like so easy right now, where it's, here are emails, I will write the email for you, I just need you to send it. Or like, here's the orientation, we'll draft it for you if you can send it. Like really just trying to empower their engagement internally to create advocates too, because it's not something natural for them.
Yeah, and I think, to talk a bit about a completely different type of model that was not based on a lot of data, like coming into Timely MD, we had only our first 25 customers were renewing. So I had no renewal data to be able to speak to this. I did have at least registration data. I knew how many students were involved. But the big piece in terms of empowering our stakeholders was, a school, by the way, too, for any of you, like we've all gone to college, or some of us have kids now going to college. Schools are not going to give us their email list, right? Like, we're not going to be the ones who are going to directly reach out to students. So the most important piece was, how are we enabling them to let students know that this is available to them? So the most important thing for us to create were toolkits and marketing assets that those schools could do. So when you talked about engagement, it's like, okay, number one, the layer of engagement is, I'm going to give you things that you can use to engage your end users. So it's a little bit of like a two-layered approach to that. So number one, it's, hey, how do I know what are the most successful materials that are out there in the wild, letting them use those. And I have to now create segmentation for how that works. So for instance, an Emory had their own entire marketing department, which is crazy. And so they could get so many students were aware, everybody knew about it, everybody had downloaded it. And then you have a community college in California where they were still, even last year, everything was remote. There's no footprint of where they're going to be on school. So what assets and what's going to work for a community college student where maybe their only interaction with a human is their advisor? So how do you get materials out to advisors who are the ones that are working with students? So we had to get very, very creative and prescriptive of giving out assets that could be easily replicated across multiple schools, and say, we may have 20 assets. These are the 3 that are most important to you to be able to use. And then you start to talk about measurement. We're using like digital asset management tools, not Gainsight or something like that. So we're having to push data asset management companies to give us measurement to be able to say, what's the most important thing? How often are these opened? How often are people downloading the things that we're giving them? And now that becomes what engagement looks like for us in terms of tying all those things together. And all of those things lived a lot more in spreadsheets than anything else. But still, it at least gave us something to try to work on and try to figure out from an engagement standpoint. So again, for those of you who are talking about like either consumers or end users and how you get to them, it becomes really important about how you're enabling and making it really, really easy for your stakeholders to be able to get that information out to everybody else. And how do you do that in a scalable way that you can update those materials really easily and quickly? Because again, all of us are in organizations, I would assume, that are changing pretty rapidly as well in terms of what services you're providing.
Awesome. So we're going to pay off our panel session name, which is very long, to the increasing loyalty. And I want to kind of like poll the audience. What does customer loyalty mean? Like what does loyalty mean in regards to that? How would we measure that?
When they're happy, even when we mess up.
Stick with you through the pain, for better, for worse.
Advocacy.
Yeah. Advocacy. Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Protecting, like if someone bad about some product, you say, oh, you're wrong.
Has your back.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, those are all really good.
We really needed people to have our back, I'll admit. Providing mental health care has its own special.
We have, I mean, most people that know me, I have like customer love is what I always say. I want our customers to love us. And it's like, how do you measure customer love? And I think a lot
Can't
of it.
get over that from Pendo, can you?
No, so I
like all
just
the
told
pink
this.
hearts
I
and
just
everything.
told that story,
Yeah.
but I stole that part, but I built it out more. But anyways, and I always say it's like the external advocacy. Yeah, so it's like the people that are willing to write on G2 Crowd, do the case study for you, do a sales prospecting call, retention expansion, obviously. But one of the things I always say, like the biggest form of loyalty is if someone brings you to their next company. You know, I think like that's when things are like really cool because that means you've made an impact. And I think, you know, I've done that for certain technologies, but I think that's the ultimate form of customer loyalty in my opinion.
Haven't we all done that with Gainsight or one of the client success software? I guess I have at least. But I thought you had a great example
Yep.
too of within the government space of like how because again these are very large, complex organizations that
They are.
in terms of
Yeah, and they're very siloed too. Like none of them really talk to each other about what integration tools they're using. So some may be, you know, a MuleSoft user, some are Microsoft. And so when I have a CIO that can thoroughly articulate what our value is behind the product and also the value behind our team, and they go to these other departments and agencies to say, use this product because of XYZ, and here's the value that we've realized so far in the last 6, 12, 18 months. And on top of that, you can reuse some of the assets that we've already built out. Like they're already doing half of my job to like sell to this other department or agency. So I feel like that also is you know, customer loyalty.
Yeah. Go for it.
I was gonna say, for those in government, you know, brand name requirement in an RFP.
Yep.
Yes.
Create
Yeah.
Yes.
level customer loyalty.
Yeah, and you always have to have that whole list if you can put in all your RFPs, the world of large RFPs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about like actually measuring customer engagement. That's what I was sort of saying. My scenario, I feel like I'm doing like reverse measurement because we're trying to figure out like, can we scale back and keep the same metrics for success with really doing more with less if we're really, really smart with how we approach it. But I know, Matt, you've talked about kind of how you measured engagement scores at MuleSoft, so I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I used Gainsight as kind of a baseline to just get a general idea of where the customer's at. And then ourselves, as a customer success team, we've created our own KPIs from, you know, executive engagement, enablement sessions. Those are just to name a few. And we would then meet internally as an account team. So we would have our customer success team, some executive leaders, solutions engineers, the account executive. We would all sit down and kind of measure on our own or based on our knowledge, like where do we see this customer? Are they red, yellow, green? Is our executive engagement red, yellow, green? How does the account executive feel about it? And that gave us a very good path to how we're going to engage with that customer. And it also allowed me as the customer success director to kind of coordinate and direct parts of the account team on like who needs to go where, right? So if there wasn't enough executive engagement, I was able to pull in like our VP of sales and say, you know, we need to do more touch points with them, or we need to do some type of customer success review where they're involved. So it allowed me to just better customize some of these meetings or engagements, whether it be on site or virtual. But overall, I thought like creating a scorecard really helped in terms of how I was engaging with each of my customers.
Yeah, I love that. And I have a question for you all or anyone in the audience. So where we're at now is tracking every engagement. And within, you know, the CSMs have to submit if they have a meeting with a customer, a call with a customer, email, blah, blah, blah. But we're also then tying in additional internal resources that attend to calls. And we're trying to like start backing into like the cost to support a customer to be successful as well. Because, you know, I'm like big into loving all customers the same, and I can't do that too. I mean, I love them all the same, but you can't support them all the same. And we'll see like, a $25,000 customer that we had 34 meetings with last year or something. And I'm kind of curious, has anybody really been able to back into like the cost of supporting engagements and how that actually shows with the data? Has anyone dug into like the resourcing model behind it? I know, right?
Right, and we tried to look at that because we were in a different position where we really were expanding. Like we were figuring out we needed more touch points than we thought, as opposed to fewer touch points than we thought. So it was less of a shrinking and more of an expansion. And with that, we were able to show now. At the same time, we were taking on retention and upsell within the team, so it was a little easier to back that in of saying like, hey, last year was not an efficiency play. Last year was really like, how are we going to grow? And then what it really ended up is that the most important thing that was about loyalty or retention was actually about how they were funding our program. So we did not even look at the right measurement. So again, you could imagine virtual services was something that everybody thought they needed over COVID, and we found that people who had done this through student fees or through particular government funding, it was easy for them. They could stick with it. Some people had gotten emergency funds for that. And if CSMs had not paid attention or the salesperson did not know where their funding came from, then they were going to basically, like, that was going to evaporate. And so you had to work a good year in advance to help them secure more funding. And that meant reaching out to different parts of the organization. So it may be that DEIB had funding to help with underserved populations, or you had to go find a different way to do that. And so for us, the touch points, we could have as many touch points as you want, and it didn't matter for the key piece that was most important to you, whether or not they renewed. And so it's like, how do you marry those data points together? Yeah.
How did you find out that was what mattered? Did you just ask customers?
Yeah, we had to start asking, right? So it's like, if you imagine, so if 2021 was our first any renewal class, right? And so we had only 25 renewing, but we did lose 2 that were specific. So it's like, okay, well, that's close enough. It's not statistically significant because we don't have enough clients to say what that's going to look like. But that really forced us to dig in and try to get expertise and start to figure that out. So then we were like, okay, now we need to start with everybody, and we need to talk about funding from the beginning, and we need to actually go back and look at, like, the viability last year was like, could we measure it from how many was funding related to how many students they had, right? So most of our contracts were pay by student, number of students. So could we show that the decrease in students impacted that? No, that did not correlate. So we basically had to make assumptions, test them with the data that we had, and then go back and say that didn't actually work. So we couldn't relate it to number of students, and so it really came down to, like, we have to look at not just how they funded our program, but how that school was funded. And that was publicly available information, but it still takes a lot of work to be able to sort through that data to really understand and correlate that, so that we were able to identify risk based on the combination of either how they were funding us or how the school was funded themselves. But it comes down to, like, in a lot of cases, you do have to ask, but we even found our people didn't always know. So we would have the surprise churn for us, and again, we're talking about a very small sample size. The CFO or somebody much more senior, somebody from a different department or somebody in their board would actually come in and say, nope, you've got to decrease what you're doing. And by the way, you can provide these services through insurance or through something else, right? So it was a combination of publicly available data that we had to ask about, and then really figuring out who within the organization was making those kinds of decisions. But it was some hard lessons learned, for sure. Yeah.
We want to ask the audience a little bit. What customer engagement tools have you used? Like, are there any things new or experimental people are trying when we think about the more for less, but ensuring that loyalty is staying the same or increasing?
Yep.
Go for it. You want me to run this mic too? Pendo?
The other one that we're using is Amberflow. So we have a usage-based model, and that helps meter what customers are actually utilizing inside our product.
Yep, and are using Pendo from the in-app education perspective?
Yeah.
Helping scale? Absolutely. Anybody else? All right, we wanted to open it up then just for a few minutes for questions. If anybody has any questions for the panelists, I'm happy to run mics, or Sophie, you're welcome to as well.
Everybody gets really quiet on the last afternoon. This is how it works.
Everybody's ready for happy hour.
While Sophie's going down there, I was curious, one of the things in loyalty, and this is me not being with a product company like I am today, is the user advocacy groups. Like, Salesforce has this group of people that are worshiping it like as if it's the best thing, so they have these communities. Is there a way to measure those kind of impact to a brand or a loyalty that is not even solicited for fees or monies or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, at MuleSoft, we would do community meetups, and we would just measure the amount of folks that would attend. And that's how we were able to at least gain a local measurement of the number of folks that were actually using in those tools. And so at those meetups, we would have a specific customer in that city to talk about how they're using MuleSoft today, and the attendees would be MuleSoft developers and architects to gain a better understanding of how to use the tool. So it gave us a pretty good, I guess, temperature of who the users are, and if we can continue to send over more events, whether it was like an API workshop or an API strategy workshop. So it gave us a good temperature for that.